Assalamualaikum. Good day everyone. Before we start to discuss about our topic, first we would like to introduce ourselves. My name is Felicity S. Odasan.
Assalamualaikum everyone, I am Berasa Madali.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Suraida El Abbas.
So, we are the reporters that will going to discuss about our topic in 2.4 in chapter 2, a glance at selected Philippine political caricature in Alfred McCoy's Philippine Cartoons, Political Caricature of American Era, 1900s to 1941, and the analysis of political caricatures during the American period. Now, let's take a glance at selected Philippine political caricature in Alfred McCoy's Philippine Cartoon, Political Caricature of American Era, 1900s to 1941. So, let me enlighten you with the word caricature or cartoons. Political cartoons and caricature are a rather recent art form which veered away from the classical art by exaggerating human features and poking fun at its subjects. It is a picture description or imitation of a person in which certain striking characteristics are exaggerated in order to create a comic or grotesque effect. Such art genre and techniques became a part of print media as a form of social and political commentary, which usually targets persons of power and authority. Cartoon became an effective tool of publicizing opinions through heavy use of symbolism, which is different from a verbose written editorial and opinion pieces. So, ang political cartoons ay isa siyang drawing or sketch na ginawa na ang layunin or main goal nito is para maghatid ng isang commentary sa politics, sa mga politicians at sa mga current events. Ang political caricatures ay isa siyang graphic description ng mga nangyari noon sa ilalim ng pamumuno ng mga Amerikano sa ating bansa. Katulad ng mga challenges, lahat ng mga paghihirap at mga impluwensya ng mga Amerikano sa mga Pilipino noon. So, the unique way that a caricature represents opinions and captures the audience's imagination is reason enough for historians to examine these political cartoons. In his book, Philippine Cartoons, Political Caricature of the American Era of 1900s to 1941, Alfred McCoy, together with Alfredo Rosas, compiled political cartoons published in newspaper dailies and periodicals in the aforementioned time period. Alfred McCoy was born in June 8, 1945 in Massachusetts, USA. He is a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he also served as director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies. On the other hand, Alfredo Rosas, who is the co-author of Alfred McCoy of Political Caricature of American Era, is an artist writer from the known Rosas clan in the Philippine print media. So, for this part, we are going to look at selected cartoons and explain the context of each one. So, the first example shown here was published in The Independent on May 20, 1916 caricature. The cartoon shows a politician from Tondo named Dr. Santos passing his crown to his brother-in-law, Dr. Barcelona. A Filipino guy, as depicted wearing salakot in Barong Tagalog, was trying to stop Santos, telling the latter to stop giving Barcelona the crown because it is not his to begin with. So, to analyze the first political caricature, this actually speaks about the politics. So, I think that the crown represents or symbolizes our country, which is the Philippines. The crown symbolizes the sovereignty that the Filipinos should have. But what happened to our history? During the Treaty of Paris, the the Philippines was sold by the Spaniards to the American in the amount of 20 million US dollars. So we know that the Filipinos, especially the government of Emilio Aguinaldo, tried to express their opinion, tried to oppose these things to happen. But they did nothing. So ayun, wala silang nagawa because there were no Filipino representative during the Treaty of Paris. Walang representative ang Philippines doon during that time. So ang nangyari, yung crown na tinutukoy ko, which is the Philippines, the sovereignty was really given to the other. So parang yung colonization from Spain ay ipinasa doon sa mga Amerikano. So I think yun yung isa sa ibig sabihin ng first example nung caricature. So the first cartoon also reveals something about the truth of political dynasty na lumaganap sa Tondo during that time. So it speaks of something na the power, the crown, yung government is given to those relatives. So parang ganun yung nangyari. I mean, the same nang nangyari sa pagpasa ng ating bansa galing sa Espanya, then ipinagbili doon sa mga Amerikano. So that was somehow the analogy of political dynasty and also type of political system that we had during the time of American occupation. Now let's move on to the next example, which will shown and explained to us by the next reporter, Miss Baisara.
Assalamualaikum everyone, I am Berasa Madali and I am here to discuss the rest of the political caricature of the American era. The second cartoon was published by The Independent on June 16, 1917. This was drawn by Fernando Amorsalo and was aimed as a commentary on the workings of Manila police at that period. Here we see a Filipino child who stole a skinny chicken because he had nothing to eat. The police officer was relentlessly pursuing the child, and a man wearing a salakol labeled Juan de la Cruz was grabbing the officer, telling him to leave the small-time pickpockets and thieves and turn at the great thieves instead. He was pointing to the huge warehouses containing bags of rice, milk, and grocery products. This cartoon is a commentary or a narration to the workings of the Manila police. It says here that instead that the police should focus on the great thieves, they are pursuing a child who is helpless and almost innocent because he just stole the chicken because he has nothing to eat. Take note about the facts or the information about this caricature. This caricature was published by The Independent and it is published on June 16, 1917. The person or the characters on this cartoon are number 1, the child, number 2, the police, and last, Juan de la Cruz. The third cartoon was a commentary on the unprecedented cases of colorum automobiles in the city streets. The Philippine Press published this commentary when fatal accidents involving colorum vehicles and taxis occurred, 2 often already. On the top of this cartoon, there is a Coche Mortales written on it, which means death cars or deadly cars. Also, here we can see a vehicle or a car, and on the top of it, there is a man looking like a Grim Reaper. Also, there is a colorum word that is written on the side of the car, and in ordinance, colorum is defined as a private motor vehicles operating as public utility vehicles but without proper authority from the LTFRB. Take note about the facts or the information about this caricature. This caricature is a commentary to the unprecedented cases of colorum automobiles in the city streets. The person or the characters in this caricature is the Grim Reaper and the 3 other persons in the picture. Take note about the facts or the information about this caricature. This caricature is a commentary to the unprecedented cases of colorum automobiles in the city streets. The person or the characters in this caricature is the Grim Reaper and the 3 other persons in the picture. The fourth cartoon depicts a cinema. A blown-up police officer was at the screen saying that couples are not allowed to neck and make out in the theater. The youngsters look horrified while older couples seem amused. Take note about the facts or the information about this caricature. The characters or the person in here, number 1, the youngster, number 2, the older couple, and number 3 is the blown-up police officer on the screen.
The next cartoon was published by The Independent on November 17, 1915. McCoy in his caption to the cartoon says that this cartoon was based on an event in 1907 when William Howard Taft was brought to the Manila Pier riding a chariot pulled by the students of Liceo de Manila. Here, we see the caricature of Uncle Sam riding a chariot pulled by Filipino boys wearing school uniforms. The Filipino boys were carrying American objects like baseball bats, whiskey, and boxing gloves. The facts or the information about this caricature. This caricature was published by The Independent on November 27, 1915, and it is based on an event in 1907. The characters are the person in this cartoon is the number 1, Uncle Sam, number 2, Filipino boys. The last cartoon was published by Lipang Kalabaw on August 24, 1904. This cartoon depicts the patronage of the United States being coveted by politicians from either of the party. In the picture, we see Uncle Sam rationing porridge to the politicians and members of Progresista Party, sometimes known as the Federalista Party, while members of the Nacionalista Party look and wait for their turn. Take note about the facts or the information about this caricature. This caricature was published by Lipang Kalabaw and it is published in August 24, 1904. The characters or the person here is number 1, Uncle Sam, number 2, the politicians, number 3, members of Progresista Party, number 4, members of Nacionalista Party. That's all. Thank you.
My name is Zoraida Abbas. So now it's my turn to discuss my chosen topic, which is analysis of political caricature during the American period. But before we start, I would like to give some information about Alfred McCoy. Si Alfred William McCoy o mas kilalang McCoy ay isang Amerikanong nananalaysay at tagapagturo. Siya din ay kasalukuyang Fred Herbie Harrington, professor ng kasaysayan sa Universidad ng Western-Madison. Si McCoy ay pinanganak noong June 8 in 1945, age of 76. Ang kanyang award na nakuha ay Wilbur Cross Medal. Nag-aaral siya sa Wally University, Columbia University Kent School. Ang kanyang mga magulang ay si Alfred Mogi McCoy, Jr. at si Margaret McCoy. Maraming cartoons ang gumawa ng kanyang mga political cartoons tungkol sa mga issue ng panahon ng Amerikano. Sa ibang librong nilabas ni Alfred McCoy, isang historya ng kanyang librong Political Caricature and Political Cartoons of the American Era, year of 1900 and 1941. Nakapaloob doon ang ilang political cartoons sa tingin ng marami ay nagaganap at patuloy pa rin nagaganap hanggang ngayon. Analysis of political caricature during the American period. The caricature means descriptions or picture na naglalarawan ng mga pangyayaring naganap sa ilalim ng kolonyal sa panahon ng American. Lahat ng mga hamon, estado at impluwensyang ginawa ng mga Amerikano sa mga taga-Pilipino. The transition from the Spanish colonial period to the American occupation period demonstrate the different strand of change, shift, culture, society, and politics. The American drastically introduced democracy to the nations and consequence were farm ideal. Aside from this, it was also during the American period that Filipino were introduced the different manifestation modernity like healthcare, modern transportations, and media. So dito na tayo sa paglipat ng mga Amerikano sa ating bansa. Ang mga Amerikano ay nagpakita ng iba't ibang pagbabago sa ating kultura, lipunan at politika. Ang mga Amerikano ay lubhang nagpakita ng demokrasya sa ating bansa. Maliban dito sa panahon din ng Amerika, kinilala at pinakilala din nila ang mga Pilipino sa iba't ibang pagpapakita ng modernidad, tulad ng pangangalaga sa kalusugan, moderneng transportation and media. Yun yung pagbabago na ginawa ng mga Amerikano simula nung dumating sila dito sa ating bansa. The post-independent and the post-Filipino-American period in the Philippines were experienced different by Filipinos coming from different classes. The upper Principala class experienced economic prosperity with opening of the Philippines economy. The United States, but also majority of the poor Filipino remained poor, disappears, and victim of state's repression. The post-independent at ang post-Filipino-America sa Pilipinas ay nakaranas ng mga Pilipino nagmula sa iba't ibang klase. Ang upper Principala ay nakaranas ng kaunlaran sa kanilang ekonomiya simula nung nagbukas ang ekonomiya ng Pilipinas sa Estados Unidos. Ngunit ang mga ibang Pilipino ay nananatiling mahirap, desperado at biktima ng panunumpil ng Estados Unidos. The selected cartoon illustrate not only the opinion of certain media outfit about the Philippine society during the American period, but also paint broad image of society politics under the United States. Ang mga napiling cartoon ay naglalarawan hindi lamang sa opinyon ng ilang mga kasuotan sa media tungkol sa lipunang Pilipinos, ngunit ipinenta din ang isang malawak na imahe sa lipunang at politiko sa ilalim ng Estados Unidos. This can be seen the rising dynastic politics in Tondo depicted in the cartoon published by The Independent. Sa ralangan ng politiko, halimbawa nakita natin ang pressure na binabayaran ng mga Pilipino para sa demokrasya ng modelo sa mga Amerikano. Una, tila ang mga Pilipinong politiko noong panahon na iyon ay hindi masyadong maintindihan ang kakayahan ng demokratikong institusyon at proseso. Nakikita natin sa tumataas na politiko ng dynastic sa Tondo. Nakalarawan sa cartoon na inilathala ng The Independent. Patronage also become the influence and powerful not only between the client and patrons, but also between the newly formed politically parties composed the elite in the United States. This was depicted in cartoons where the United States represented by Uncle Sam. Ang patronage ay naging impluwensyahan at makapangyarihan hindi lamang sa pagitan ng mga kliente at mga parokyan, kundi sa pagitan din ng mga bagong nabuo na partidong pampolitiko na binubuo ng mga piling tao sa Estados Unidos. Ito ay nilalarawan sa cartoon kung saan ang Estados Unidos na kinatawan ni Uncle Sam ay nagbigay ng mga dole-out para sa mga miyembro ng Federista, habang ang mga politiko ng nasyonalista ay tumitingin at naghihintay lamang sa kanilang mga tiyon. The transitions from Catholic-centered Spanish-Filipino society to an imperial American assimilated one, its complications were also depicted in the cartoons. One example is the unprecedented increased motorized vehicle in the city. Automobile become popular mode transportation in the city lead to the emergency taxes. So dito napapaloob yung mga batas na ginawa ng mga Amerikano tungkol sa mga vehicle na kinakailangan daw is bago sila mamaneho is meron silang mga license kasi maaari silang sampahan ng kaso o payment. Siguro ganun din sa atin hanggang ngayon. Hindi ka maaari makapasok sa Cotabato, sa area ng Cotabato kung wala kang license. Like what I said, maaari ka nilang sampahan ng kaso or payment. Another example is what McCoy called sexual revolution that occurred in 1930s. Young people as early that period distribute the conservative Filipino mindset by engaging in daring sexual activity in public place like cinema. Tinawag din ni McCoy na sexual revolution ang mga naganap noong 1930s. Ang mga kabataan kasi noon is kino-convince nila yung mga Pilipino na gawin yung mga activity ito. Lastly, cartoon also illustrate the condition of poor Filipino in the Philippines now governed by the United States. From the looks of it, nothing must change. Ang panghuling inilarawan ni McCoy sa cartoon na kanyang ginawa ay ang kalagayan ng mga Pilipino sa Pilipinas na ngayon ay pinamamahalan ng Estados Unidos. Sa itsura nito ngayon, revolution that acquired in 1930s, young people as early that period distribute the conservative Filipino mindset by engaging in darling sexual activity in public place like cinema. Tinawag din ni McCoy na sexual revolution ang mga naganap noong 1930s. Ang mga kabataan kasi noon is kino-convince nila yung mga Pilipino na gawin yung mga activity ito. Lastly, cartoon also illustrate the condition of poor Filipino in the Philippines now governed by the United States. From the looks of it, nothing must change. Ang panghuling inilarawan ni McCoy sa cartoon na kanyang ginawa ay ang kalagayan ng mga Pilipino sa Pilipinas na ngayon ay pinamamahalan ng Estados Unidos. Sa itsura nito ngayon, wala nang nagbago. The other cartoon depict how American control Filipino through seemingly harmless American objects by controlling their consequences, and mentally Americans got to control and subjugate the Filipino. Ang iba pang mga cartoons ay naglalarawan kung paano kinokontrol ng mga Amerikano ang mga Pilipino. Hindi nagtagal na control at nasakop na ng mga Amerikano ang mga Pilipino. That's on, and thank you for watching us. So we will end our discussions. If you have any questions, let us know. Thank you.